Chapter 1: The Boy Who Counted Everything. Omaha, Nebraska. The year is 1941. A serious 11-year-old boy walks into a brokerage office, clutching every dollar he has ever saved. His name is Warren Edward Buffett, and today he is about to make a decision that will quietly shape the next 80 years of his life. He hands over $114 and buys 3 shares of a company called Cities Service Preferred. $38 each. It is everything he has. To the men on the trading floor, it is pocket change. To Warren, it is a declaration. Almost immediately, the stock falls, from $38 to $27. The boy watches his money shrink by nearly a third, and he feels the cold weight of fear that every investor knows. But he holds. When the price climbs back to $40, he sells, pocketing a small profit, relieved to escape. Then he watches in horror as that same stock soars to $202. It is his first lesson, and it is brutal. Patience is worth more than relief. He would never forget it. But Warren was not born into wealth. He was born in the shadow of the Great Depression, on August 30th, 1930, into a city gripped by fear and unemployment. His father, Howard, was a stockbroker who watched clients vanish overnight when the banks collapsed. Money in the Buffett household was never abstract. It was survival. And young Warren became obsessed with it, not to spend, but to multiply. By the age of 6, he was buying 6 packs of Coca-Cola for 25 cents and selling the bottles individually for a nickel each, pocketing the difference. He sold chewing gum door to door, refusing to break up a 5-pack just to make a single sale. He delivered newspapers, not one route, but several, memorizing which customers paid and which dodged. He collected and resold golf balls. He hauled racetrack betting slips off the floor, hunting for discarded winners. Every nickel was a soldier, and Warren was building an army. At 13, he filed his first tax return, deducting his bicycle as a business expense. By the time he was a teenager, he and a friend had bought used pinball machines, placing them in barbershops across Omaha, splitting the profits with the owners. Within months, they were earning real money, a fully operational business run by boys not old enough to drive. By the time Warren graduated high school, he had saved roughly $5,000, the equivalent of over $60,000 today. He was already thinking about retirement, already calculating the magic of compounding interest, already certain of one thing most adults never grasp, that small sums, given enough time and discipline, become unimaginable fortunes. The boy who counted everything had found his religion, but the road ahead would test him in ways that no childhood lemonade stand ever could. Because before Warren Buffett could build an empire, he first had to be rejected by the very institution he believed would launch him. Chapter 2: The Teacher Who Changed Everything. By 1950, Warren Buffett believed he was ready for the big leagues. Confident, ambitious, and armed with a hunger for knowledge, he applied to Harvard Business School, the gateway to American finance. Harvard rejected him. The interview lasted only minutes. They decided the 19-year-old looked too young, too awkward, too unpolished. It was a humiliation that could have ended the story right there. Instead, it redirected it. Searching through other programs, Warren discovered that 2 legendary investors, Benjamin Graham and David Dodd, taught at Columbia University in New York. Graham had written a book that had already detonated inside Warren's mind, The Intelligent Investor. Years later, Buffett would call it the best book about investing ever written. He applied to Columbia almost on impulse, and this time, he was accepted. In Graham's classroom, everything clicked. Graham preached a radical philosophy he called value investing, the idea that every stock has an intrinsic worth, and that the market, driven by fear and greed, regularly misprices it. The job of the investor was not to gamble, but to buy a dollar for 50 cents and wait. Graham taught his students to think of the market as a manic business partner he nicknamed Mr. Market. A man who shows up every day offering wild prices, sometimes euphoric, sometimes despairing. The disciplined investor simply waited for his madness, then took advantage of it. Warren absorbed every word. He earned the only A+ Graham had ever awarded in his career. Desperate to learn from his hero, Warren offered to work for Graham's firm for free. Graham turned him down. Undeterred, Warren returned to Omaha, sold stocks, taught a night class on investing, and kept writing to his mentor. Finally, in 1954, Graham relented and hired him at Graham Newman in New York. For 2 years, Warren studied the master up close, devouring financial reports, hunting for undervalued companies, sharpening his instincts. Then, in 1956, Benjamin Graham retired and dissolved the firm. Warren, now 25, faced a choice: stay in New York or go home. He chose Omaha, and there in his hometown, he made the move that would change financial history. He gathered 7 investors, family and close friends, and formed the Buffett Partnership Limited. The total starting capital was just over $105,000. Warren himself contributed only $100. He set unusual terms. He would take no fee unless he beat the market, and he would absorb a share of any losses. He was betting on himself, completely. Operating from his bedroom, then a small office, Warren went hunting for bargains the rest of Wall Street ignored. His results were staggering. Year after year, the partnership crushed the market averages. Word spread. More investors begged to get in. By the 1960s, the boy who had been rejected by Harvard was quietly outperforming nearly every professional in the country. But Warren was about to make a decision so unconventional, so seemingly foolish, that even he would later call it one of the biggest mistakes of his life. Chapter 3: The $100 billion Mistake. The company was called Berkshire Hathaway, a struggling New England textile manufacturer, the kind of business slowly being crushed by foreign competition. By every measure, it was dying. Mills were closing, profits were vanishing, and yet, to Warren Buffett's bargain-hunting eyes, the stock looked irresistibly cheap, trading well below the value of the company's own assets. Starting in 1962, he began buying shares. Then came the moment that would haunt and define him. The owner of Berkshire, a man named Seabury Stanton, verbally agreed to buy back Warren's shares at $11.50 apiece. But when the official offer arrived in writing, the price had been shaved down to 11 3/8, an eighth of a dollar, a trivial sum. But to Warren, it was a betrayal, a petty insult. Enraged, he did something driven entirely by emotion rather than logic. Instead of selling, he bought more. He kept buying until he seized control of the entire company, then fired Stanton. He had taken over a failing textile business out of spite. Decades later, Buffett would admit the truth. Pouring his money into that dying industry was a colossal blunder. He estimated it may have cost him as much as $200 billion in lost returns. And yet, in one of history's greatest ironies, that flawed decision became the vehicle for everything that followed. Warren realized the textile mills would never recover, so he made a pivot of pure genius. Instead of fighting to save the looms, he used the cash the business generated to buy other companies, better companies. Berkshire Hathaway would no longer be a textile maker. It would become a holding company, a financial fortress, a machine for owning great businesses. In 1967, he directed Berkshire to buy an insurance company called National Indemnity. This was the masterstroke. Insurance companies collect premiums up front and pay claims later, meaning they sit on enormous pools of money, called float, that Buffett could invest in the meantime. It was, in effect, billions of dollars he could use without it truly being his. Around this time, Warren also met the man who would become his lifelong partner and intellectual equal, Charlie Munger, a sharp, blunt-spoken lawyer from Omaha. Munger pushed Buffett to evolve beyond Graham's strict bargain hunting. His advice was revolutionary. It's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. That philosophy led to one of their finest purchases. In 1972, Berkshire bought See's Candies for $25 million, a beloved brand with loyal customers and the power to raise prices year after year. See's would go on to generate well over $2 billion in profit. The dying textile company had become the engine of an empire, but the greater the empire grew, the greater the danger, and soon Warren Buffett's most precious asset, his reputation, would hang by a thread. Chapter 4: 5 Minutes from Ruin. By the late 1980s, Warren Buffett was no longer just an investor. He was an institution. His annual letters to shareholders were studied like scripture. His every move was tracked. He had built a reputation for integrity so spotless it was almost legendary. And reputation to Buffett was everything. He had a saying, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently." In 1991, those words came terrifyingly to life. Berkshire had invested heavily in Salomon Brothers, one of the most powerful investment banks on Wall Street. Then the scandal broke. Traders at Salomon had been caught illegally rigging bids in U.S. Treasury bond auctions, cheating the government's own market. Worse, top executives had known about the violations and failed to report them. The federal government was preparing to shut Salomon down entirely. If that happened, it could trigger a financial collapse, wiping out Berkshire's massive investment and dragging Buffett's name through the mud. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was suddenly 5 minutes from ruin. Buffett did not run. He stepped directly into the fire. He flew to New York and agreed to become interim chairman of Salomon Brothers, personally taking control of the crisis. He was now responsible for saving the very firm that had betrayed him. He cooperated fully with regulators, opening the books, cleaning house, firing those responsible. He testified before Congress, the cameras fixed on his plain, honest face. And there, before the nation, he delivered a message to his employees that would become famous throughout the business world. Lose money for the firm, and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation for the firm, and I will be ruthless. It was not a performance. It was the core of everything he believed. Buffett worked without pay, putting his own credibility on the line to convince the government that Salomon had changed. Slowly, agonizingly, it worked. Regulators pulled back from destroying the firm. Salomon survived, the financial system avoided a shock, and Berkshire's investment was ultimately preserved. But the lesson was seared into Buffett's soul forever. He had watched how quickly a culture of greed could metastasize, how a few reckless individuals could threaten to destroy decades of trust. From that moment on, his obsession with character, with hiring honest people and avoiding businesses he didn't understand, became absolute. Through the 1990s, his caution would be tested again, but in a very different way. A new kind of madness was sweeping the markets. Internet companies with no profits, sometimes no revenue at all, were soaring to billion-dollar valuations. Everyone was getting rich overnight. Everyone except Warren Buffett, who refused to touch a single one of them. And for the first time in his career, the smartest investor in the world was being called a relic, a washed-up old man who simply didn't understand the future. Chapter 5. Be greedy when others are fearful. By 1999, Warren Buffett looked finished. The dot-com boom was at its peak, and technology stocks were doubling, tripling, exploding in value. Companies that had never earned a single dollar of profit were worth more than industrial giants. Wall Street was drunk on the internet, and Buffett stubbornly refused to drink. He would not invest in businesses he did not understand. He could not calculate their intrinsic value, and so he simply walked away. The financial press mocked him. Berkshire's stock fell while the tech indexes screamed higher. Magazines suggested the great Warren Buffett had finally lost his touch, that the old rules no longer applied, that a 70-year-old man from Omaha couldn't comprehend the new economy. Buffett endured the ridicule in silence. He had seen Mr. Market lose his mind before. He simply repeated the principle Benjamin Graham had taught him half a century earlier. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Then in the year 2000, the bubble burst. Trillions of dollars in paper wealth evaporated almost overnight. Internet darlings collapsed into bankruptcy. Fortunes vanished. The investors who had laughed at Buffett were wiped out, while Berkshire Hathaway, untouched by the carnage, stood stronger than ever. The man they called a relic had been right all along, but his greatest test of nerve was still to come. In 2008, the global financial system began to crack. Banks teetered, Lehman Brothers collapsed, credit froze, panic seized the entire planet, and the stock market went into freefall. It was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, the very era into which Buffett had been born. And while the world ran for the exits, Warren Buffett did the opposite. He had always lived by a single contrarian creed: be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Now, with everyone terrified, Buffett went shopping. He poured $5 billion into Goldman Sachs and $3 billion into General Electric, striking deals on extraordinarily favorable terms when no one else had the courage or the cash to act. Then, in October 2008, with markets still plunging, he published an op-ed in the New York Times under a blunt headline, "Buy American, I Am." He declared that he was buying U.S. stocks for his personal account, betting on the long-term strength of American business even in its darkest hour. It was a stunning act of confidence, a steady hand extended to a panicking world, and once again, he was proven right. As the economy slowly recovered, those crisis-era investments generated billions in profit for Berkshire. While others had been destroyed by fear, Buffett had been enriched by discipline. The boy who once watched his father's clients ruined in the Depression had now turned the greatest financial catastrophe in 80 years into one of his finest triumphs. He had survived ridicule, scandal, and collapse. And now, the small sums he had been compounding for a lifetime were about to cross a threshold almost no human being had ever reached. Chapter 6. The Tree He Planted Long Ago. In 2021, Warren Buffett's personal fortune crossed $100 billion. Stop and absorb that number. It began with $114, scraped together by an 11-year-old boy selling Coca-Cola and chewing gum on the streets of Omaha. It grew through 8 decades of relentless patience, not through luck, not through gambling, but through the quiet, almost boring magic of compounding. Buffett himself once explained the secret in the simplest possible terms. Someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. He had planted his tree as a child, and then he had done the hardest thing of all. He let it grow. Consider this staggering truth. More than 99% of Buffett's wealth was earned after his 50th birthday. Most of it came after he turned 65, an age when most people retire. His fortune was not built by moving fast. It was built by never stopping. He still lives in the same modest house in Omaha that he bought in 1958 for $31,500. He still eats simple breakfasts, drinks Coca-Cola, and reads for hours every single day. The richest investor in history never needed yachts or mansions. For Warren, money was never about consumption. It was about the game, the discipline, the proof that integrity and patience could beat greed and noise. And then came his final defining act. Buffett announced that he would give nearly all of his fortune away. Together with Bill and Melinda Gates, he launched the Giving Pledge, calling on the world's billionaires to donate the majority of their wealth to charity. Buffett pledged to give away more than 99% of his own, tens of billions of dollars, flowing out to fight disease, poverty, and inequality. The man who had spent a lifetime accumulating would spend his final years dispersing. His lessons now echo far beyond Wall Street. Live below your means. Invest in what you understand. Guard your reputation as your most precious asset. Be patient when everyone else is rushing. Be brave when everyone else is afraid. And never, ever bet against the long game. He distilled his entire philosophy into 2 simple rules. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. Warren Buffett's story is not really about stocks or billions. It is about the astonishing power of consistency over time, the idea that ordinary actions, repeated with discipline across a lifetime, can compound into something extraordinary. The boy who counted every nickel became the patient giant who outlasted every panic, every bubble, every crisis the 20th and 21st centuries could throw at him. He proved that the greatest fortunes are not seized in a single brilliant moment, but grown slowly, quietly, by those wise enough to start early and disciplined enough to wait. He planted his tree with $114, and the whole world is still standing in its shade.